My name is Hannah Brooks. 3 days after my grandmother's funeral, my brother stood in front of the old family house and changed every lock. He looked at me from the other side of the iron fence and said something that left everyone present in complete silence. This house finally belongs to the right person. No one objected. No one asked any questions, and the most painful part was that they all believed he deserved it. If someone looked at the Brooks family from the outside, they would see a perfect picture. An old house nestled in a quiet Charleston neighborhood, a graceful mother, a successful son working in real estate, and a daughter who always showed up whenever the family needed help. But there was one truth the neighbors never knew. Some people spend their entire lives holding a home together, only to be treated like strangers at the very door they protected. During the last 8 years of Margaret Brooks's life, Hannah was living almost 2 separate lives. During the day, she worked as a financial manager for a local transportation company. In the evenings, she drove to her grandmother's house. She prepared medications, cooked dinner, cleaned the house, drove her grandmother to medical appointments, and spent hours listening to stories that had happened decades earlier. No one ever asked her to do those things, but Hannah had always believed that family was a responsibility. Meanwhile, Ethan Brooks rarely appeared. He lived in Florida. Whenever he came back to Charleston, he arrived in a different new car. He always talked about major projects, deals that were about to succeed, investments that would bring in millions of dollars. Everyone admired Ethan, because he knew how to tell stories people wanted to believe. Hannah did not. She was never good at attracting attention. She simply worked quietly, paid bills quietly, and cleaned up the consequences quietly. Many times, Ethan would call their mother and claim he was going through a temporary financial setback. A few weeks later, the family would gather money to help him again. What no one knew was that most of that money came from Hannah. She never told anyone, and she never asked for it back. To the entire family, Hannah was like a bridge. Everyone walked across it. No one looked down. As time passed, Margaret's health gradually declined, but there was one thing that always troubled Hannah. During the final months of her life, her grandmother often stared at her for a long time, as if she wanted to say something. One autumn afternoon, golden sunlight covered the garden behind the house. Margaret reached for her granddaughter's hand. Her voice was weak, but clear. Some truths should only be revealed after we're no longer here. Hannah laughed softly. She assumed it was simply the reflection of an elderly woman looking back on the past. But Margaret did not smile. Her expression remained serious, almost as if she were trying to memorize the face in front of her one last time. A few months later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. On the day of the funeral, a light rain fell across Charleston's cobblestone streets. Relatives returned from different places. Ethan showed up as well. This time, he stayed longer than usual. Immediately after the memorial service ended, the family attorney announced the contents of the current will. Everything happened too quickly, too unexpectedly. According to the document, Ethan would inherit the entire historic family home. Hannah was barely mentioned. Whispers spread throughout the room, but Ethan simply smiled. It was a strange smile. Not happiness, more like certainty, as though he had known the outcome long before anyone else. 3 days later, Hannah drove to the familiar house. She brought her old key and a small bouquet of flowers to place on the porch. But the moment she reached the front door, she froze. The locks had been changed, every single one. She tried each key one by one. None of them worked. At that exact moment, Ethan stepped out of the house. He spun a new set of keys around his finger, then looked at his sister coldly. "You don't need to come back here anymore. This property belongs to me now." His words echoed through the silent yard, like a blade cutting through every year of sacrifice that came before. But Ethan didn't know one thing. The woman the entire family had always viewed as the obedient daughter, the easiest person to take advantage of, was also the only person who knew every financial secret the Brooks family had buried. And somewhere inside a locked safe, a truth was waiting to be uncovered. A truth powerful enough to change everything. I didn't sleep that night. Not because the house had been taken from me, but because, for the first time in years, all the pieces were beginning to stop fitting together. I sat by the window of my small apartment, watching raindrops slide down the glass. Margaret's face during the final days of her life kept replaying in my mind. There was something she wanted to say, something she never had the chance to tell me. And that feeling only grew stronger the next morning. Hannah's phone rang just after she arrived at the office. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. "My name is Thomas Greene. I was a friend of Margaret's. I think you should meet with me. There's something that belongs to you." An hour later, Hannah was sitting in a small cafe near the Charleston harbor. Thomas arrived carrying an old yellow envelope. The corners were worn with age. He placed it carefully on the table. There was hesitation in his aging eyes. "Your grandmother asked me to keep this more than a year ago. She told me to give it to you only if something happened to the house." Hannah felt her heart begin to race. She opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Margaret's familiar handwriting. Line after line appeared beneath the morning sunlight. "If you're reading this letter, it means everything happened exactly the way I feared it would. Do not believe everything you hear about my estate, especially anything Ethan tells you." Hannah felt her breathing slow. Margaret wrote that she had discovered money disappearing from her accounts over the past several years. She did not want to create a family scandal while she was alive, but she also refused to let the truth stay buried forever. At the bottom of the letter was a bank address, and one sentence that sent a chill through Hannah's body. "The truth is inside safe deposit box 27. Don't let them get to it before you do." During the drive to the bank, Hannah could barely remember how she got there. A strange feeling spread through her body, part fear, part hope. The safe deposit box was located inside a secure room at the back of the bank. An employee verified her documents, then handed her a small silver key. When the metal door opened, Hannah found a thick box of documents. There was no cash inside, no jewelry, only paperwork. A lot of paperwork, bank statements, transaction receipts, sales agreements, and a black notebook. The more she read, the colder she felt. Several valuable antiques from Margaret's collection had disappeared over the previous 3 years. Every item had been carefully documented, date removed, estimated value, suspected individual, and one name appeared again and again: Ethan Brooks. Hannah had to read it several times before she could believe it. No, that can't be possible. But the documents remained there, cold, clear, emotionless. That evening, she brought everything home. The apartment was silent. The only sound was the steady turning of pages. Then she found something unexpected. About 6 months before her death, Margaret had met with another attorney, not the family attorney, a completely independent lawyer. The file was clear. Request for preparation of a new will. Hannah froze. A new will. If this was true, then the document announced after the funeral might not have been the final version at all. She immediately called the phone number listed in the file. The woman who answered was Olivia Grant, a retired financial professional with decades of experience. After listening to Hannah explain everything, Olivia remained silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I met Margaret several times. She was very worried. She believed someone was manipulating her assets." Hannah tightened her grip on the phone. "Was that person Ethan?" Olivia did not answer directly, but what she said next was even more unsettling. "Your grandmother once told me that the most dangerous person isn't the one who takes the money, it's the one who controls the story." That night, Hannah sat alone, surrounded by dozens of folders and documents. For the first time, she realized something important. Maybe the house was never the real goal. Maybe Ethan didn't just want the property. He wanted complete control over Margaret's legacy. He wanted to be the only person allowed to decide what the truth was. Just then, a new email appeared on her screen. The sender was the family's law office. The subject line contained only a few words: Urgent Inheritance Dispute Notice. Hannah opened the message, read every line, then slowly leaned back in her chair. Outside the window, the Charleston sky was turning dark gray. The first summer storm was approaching, and she finally understood the real battle was only beginning, because what she held in her hands was no longer suspicion. It was a collection of secrets powerful enough to destroy everything Ethan had spent years building. There are moments in life when you realize that the person you feared for years was only powerful because they believed you would never fight back. That morning, Hannah walked into attorney Rebecca Turner's office carrying a box of documents so heavy it was almost impossible to hold with both arms. Inside were the secrets the Brooks family had spent years trying to bury. Rebecca opened the files one by one. The more she read, the more serious her expression became. The room fell silent. The only sound was the steady turning of pages. Finally, she looked up. This is no longer a routine inheritance dispute. Hannah felt her heart pounding. Rebecca pushed a folder toward her. If these documents are accurate, Ethan didn't just conceal assets. He may have transferred several items before the inheritance process was completed. Hannah stared down at the table. A cold sensation ran through her body. The situation was far worse than she had imagined. The following weeks disappeared into dozens of meetings. Rebecca and her investigative team began reviewing every transaction, every invoice, every contract, every bank account. A completely different picture slowly emerged. In the eyes of everyone around him, Ethan had always been the successful son, the rightful heir, the only person capable of managing the family estate. But behind that image was a mountain of debt, failed projects, unpaid loans, and suspicious financial activity stretching back for years. The person who surprised Hannah the most was her own mother, Linda Brooks, the woman who had always defended Ethan, the woman who constantly insisted that Hannah was being overly sensitive. At first, Linda refused to cooperate. She didn't answer calls. She didn't attend meetings. She avoided every conversation about the investigation. Then Rebecca uncovered a series of money transfers. The recipient was Ethan. The sender was Margaret Brooks. The amounts were so large that nobody could dismiss them as mistakes. When Linda saw the records, she was speechless. For the first time in years, she began questioning the son she had always protected. Meanwhile, Ethan remained remarkably confident. He continued posting photos on social media, attending public events. He even openly told relatives that Hannah was trying to destroy the family for money. Many people believed him. At least they did until Rebecca found the video footage. The discovery happened entirely by accident. Margaret's antique shop had once been equipped with an old surveillance system. After her death, nobody thought the recording still existed, but a technician managed to recover the hard drive. When the first video appeared on the screen, the entire investigative team fell silent. There was Ethan, walking into the storage room behind the shop late at night. No employees, no witnesses, just him. And one by one, valuable antiques being carried out of the building, one clip, then another. Then another. Every video told the same story. No explanation was necessary. No argument could erase it. The truth was speaking for itself. The mediation hearing arrived sooner than Hannah expected. A pale gray sky hung over Charleston. Inside the conference room, the tension was almost unbearable. Ethan appeared exactly as he always had, calm, composed, confident. He sat across from his sister. The familiar smile remained on his face, like a man who already knew he had won. The hearing began. Ethan's attorney challenged every accusation. He argued that the claims were based on assumptions, that Hannah had misunderstood Margaret's intentions, that the financial records proved nothing. Rebecca listened, calmly, patiently, until she finally turned on the presentation screen. The room darkened. The first video appeared, then the second, then the third. The smile vanished from Ethan's face. He sat completely still, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. When the final video ended, the silence felt heavier than any accusation ever could. Ethan's attorney lowered his head and reviewed the evidence again, page after page. His hands moved faster with every document. Sweat began forming on his forehead. A few minutes later, he leaned toward his client, but the room was so quiet that everyone heard him. "We have a very serious problem." For the first time since the battle began, Ethan had no answer. His eyes shifted nervously. His confidence disappeared. The perfect mask he had worn for years was beginning to crack. Hannah sat across from him, watching quietly. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel victorious. What she felt was something far stranger. Relief. because after years of being treated as the weakest person in the family, she had turned out to be the only one patient enough to preserve the truth. And now that truth was preparing to destroy the entire empire Ethan had built on lies. But Hannah still didn't know one thing. The biggest shock facing the Brooks family was yet to come. The expanded investigation had just been approved, and what the investigators were about to uncover would change the fate of every member of the family forever. 6 weeks after the mediation hearing, the entire Brooks family began to fall apart in a way no one could have predicted. Secrets that had been buried for years slowly emerged into the light. There were no more excuses. No more carefully crafted stories designed to protect Ethan. Only the truth remained, and the truth always carries its own weight. The expanded investigation began immediately after the mediation ended. Investigators reviewed every financial record connected to Margaret's estate, every transaction, every account, every contract. When the final report was presented, the room fell almost completely silent. Ethan had secretly sold several antiques belonging to his grandmother before her death. He used the money to cover losses from failed investments. Even worse, some inheritance documents had been altered before they were submitted to the family attorney. Hannah's suspicions had been correct from the very beginning. The person trying to control the entire estate had never been her. It had always been Ethan. The news spread quickly throughout the family. Those who had once defended Ethan became quiet. Phone calls suddenly became less frequent. The voices supporting him disappeared. The person hit hardest by the revelation was Linda Brooks. For years, she had believed her son was the pride of the family, the rightful heir, the one who would preserve the family's reputation. Now everything had shattered. One afternoon, Linda asked to meet Hannah. They sat across from each other in the small garden behind Hannah's apartment. The older woman looked far more exhausted than she had only a few months earlier. There were wrinkles Hannah had never noticed before. There were tears she had never seen in her mother's eyes. "I'm sorry." Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. It sounded as though it might break apart at any moment. For the first time in years, Hannah didn't know how to respond. She had imagined this moment many times. She thought she would be angry. She thought she would finally say everything she had kept inside. She thought she would list every hurt she had endured. But when she looked at the woman sitting across from her, all she felt was sadness. Because sometimes the truth doesn't destroy only the guilty, it also destroys those who chose not to see it. A month later, the final ruling was announced. The court confirmed multiple violations involving the management of the inheritance. The will presented after the funeral was no longer considered the only valid basis for determining Margaret's intentions. The newly discovered evidence was admitted and reviewed. At last, Margaret's true wishes became clear. As the judge read the decision, Hannah sat completely still. The historic family home was transferred to her. The antique shop belonged to her. A secret investment fund Margaret had established years earlier was also awarded to its rightful heir, but the biggest surprise was still waiting. A few days after all the legal matters were finalized, Olivia Grant called her. "There's one more thing Margaret left behind, something she asked to be opened only after everything was over." Hannah met Olivia at the attorney's office. On the table sat a small envelope, yellowed with age. Only her name was written on the front. In Margaret's familiar handwriting, Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was her grandmother's final letter. It wasn't long, only a few lines, but every word blurred her vision with tears. "If you're reading this, it means you've made it through everything. The family may believe that the strongest person is the one who owns the most wealth, but they were wrong. The person who preserves a family is not the one who carries the Brooks name. It's the one who chooses to love, even when nobody is watching." Hannah folded the letter. Tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. For the first time since her grandmother's death, she allowed herself to cry. Not because of pain, but because she finally felt understood. Recognized. Seen. The very thing she had waited years to receive. That autumn, Hannah began restoring the old house. She kept the garden exactly as her grandmother had cared for it. She left the wooden chair on the porch untouched. She preserved every family photograph hanging on the walls. The antique shop, however, was transformed into a community center for senior citizens in the neighborhood, a place where older people could gather, talk, read books, and never feel forgotten. As for Ethan, he left Charleston not long afterward. The luxury cars were gone, the glamorous social media posts disappeared, the success stories he once told everyone faded away. Life moved forward, just not in the way he had planned. One quiet morning, Hannah sat beside the familiar window. Sunlight stretched across the old wooden floor. A cup of hot coffee rested in her hands. The peace around her felt almost unreal. Then her eyes drifted to the new set of keys lying on the table. A small smile appeared on her face. Ethan had believed changing the locks would push her out of the family's life. Instead, that decision opened the door to the entire truth. Some people believe power comes from money. Others believe it comes from control. But Margaret had been right all along. True power belongs to the person who is willing to face the truth, even when they must stand alone. And sometimes justice does not arrive through shouting. It arrives through patience. An old letter, a buried secret, and the courage to never turn away from the truth.